Good, hello. Can I welcome to the stage Emma Norrington, who will do the introduction.
Good evening, can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So yes, I'm Emma Norrington. I'm Director of Development at Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust. We've been around for 60 years now. We're a wildlife conservation charity. We're part of a whole national network of wildlife trusts across the country, including BBOUT, which if you're a local you will know quite well because they run College Lake just around the corner from here. So as we know, UK is one of the most nature depleted countries on the planet, which is a horrible statistic really. But we believe as the Wildlife Trust that everybody can do something about that. Everyone can take an action that can help nature to recover. So at the Wildlife Trust, our trust, we do various different things. We manage our own nature reserves, Aubrey Nowers, which we were talking about a minute ago, ran not that far from here, and parts of Tring reservoirs. But one of the really important things that we do is a lot of the focus of our work really is working with other people. So that's working with landholders, farmers, councils, other landholders, but also just communities in general, helping them, advising them, giving them ideas of how they can take action for wildlife on their patch. So that was one of the reasons I was really pleased to be asked to come to this today, because John Lewis-Stempel, he's an award-winning author, you all know that. He's got amazing books, they're all out there, which you can see afterwards. But he's also an individual who's been taking his own personal action for wildlife on his own land. He's done amazing stuff. You can see some books out there. There's one about the wood, which is an incredible, inspirational book all about learning about how to manage a woodland while working with nature. And he really learns how to look after his landscapes, his meadowlands. You go and have a look at them yourself afterwards, I won't go on. But he's done some really incredible things that I find personally very inspiring. And he kind of goes back to old ways of doing things, kind of looks at how to, as I say, work with nature and to really care for his landscape. And he has a recurring theme about the deepness of connection that we can have with our landscapes. And I think that's just so incredibly important. And when you read throughout his books, you can see it. And we're really going to need that deep connection if we're going to do what we need to do in order to enable nature to recover. So I'm really excited to find out about John's new book, as I'm sure you all are, and you don't need to hear from me any longer. And so I hope you will join me in welcoming John Lewis-Stempel to the stage.
After that introduction, I might just quit now and leave. Obviously, it's always a pleasure to be in Tring with your conveniently handy railway station. Always fine. Do you know what the greatest fear is in the life of the modern writer? It's not the blank page, it's not even, the blank screen, because even I am, have one of those kind of computery things you tap. It's that no one will come to your talk. So thank you. As people much younger than me would say, #relief. Anyway, so yes, I'm here to talk about England, a natural history. Oh, by the way, isn't the cover beautiful? Okay. And as you all know, you should always judge a book by its cover. There's going to be a certain amount of panto in this. I feed you the lines and you do the responses, okay? Because clearly, this beautiful cover reflects the beauty of my lyrical writing inside. He says, hopefully, at this point you say, yes, it does. Yes, it does. But seriously, I think what the cover does capture is the beauty of the English landscape, the English countryside. Do you know what? It's been a particular arrogance of England to think itself a sort of Eden. If you think about, I mean, Shakespeare was a particularly enamoured tribune, wasn't he? All that stuff in Richard II about blessed plot, demi-paradise, precious stone. But do you know what? There is something about England. Yes, the providential Goldilocks placement in the Gulf Stream helps, because England is neither too hot nor too cold. I do grant you it's a bit wet. But that is insufficient to explain the extraordinary variety of the English countryside. I mean, from the dramatic peaks of the Lake District to Thomas Hardy's Herbie Dorset heathland, from the sylvan beechwoods of the home counties to the North Yorkshire moors, deer parks, that glorious grassy green swell which is the South Downs traditional chalkland, Glyndebourne notes playing on a summer's eve, and of course those hedge meadows and fields that come to mind when one says the word England. This extraordinary variety of landscapes, the 12 iconic collected here, yes, it does owe something to Providence, that placement in the Gulf Stream. But it owes rather more to us, to humans. Because if Genesis of whatever sort, geology, creation, gave England its place in the Atlantic, much of the beauty of the English landscape is literally manufactured. It is the result of human intervention. The English countryside is a work of pictorial art because we made it so. We made it so. Because its beauty is the result of agriculture, culture being a significant thing, farming, in other words. To put the matter into a nutshell, 6,000 years ago, Neolithic farmers rocked up on the south coast. And what did they actually find? They found that England, or what would be England, covered from sea to sea in trees. Yes, there were some glades. Yes, there were some wet bits. But principally, the place was covered with trees. And what did those Neolithic farmers do? They chopped down the trees. I say, farmers of yore, take a bow. Because what you did was you discovered what was essentially a monoculture in England, and you actually made a variety of habitats. Later generations, of course, only added to our landscape gallery. The Normans come along with their deer parks. At one stage, in the medieval era, 2% of England's land surface was actually devoted to deer parks. Yes, deer parks were always a living meat larder, but there was also always something else. They were always intended to be an English Shangri-La. It had an aesthetic. They were always meant to be beautiful. And then, of course, you get the Georgians enclosure with their thorny hedged fields. All these habitats, you see, came to have their dependent fauna and flora. These human-created habitats had their own ecosystems, their own ecologies. The clue, folks, is in the name of those creatures and those flowers: corn marigold, corn cockle, meadow pipit, meadow butterfly. Nature wasn't actually the loser by this human intervention. The farmer created sheep-nibbled grassland of the South Downs is actually as botanically rich as rainforest. In summer, when it's flowering, it looks like something, a kind of embroidered Tudor robe fit for a queen, so rich is it in colour. A traditional hay meadow on a farm can have 50 plant species per metre. If all the oaks with a girth of 9 metres, indicating great antiquity, were added up, there are 115 in England and only 96 in the rest of Europe. Why? Because the majority of those oaks of great antiquity reside in deer parks. Why do they reside in deer parks? It's because in the wildwood, an oak is crowded and rarely grows to its full majesty. In the open space of a deer park, it can do that because what deer do is a kind of paradox. They nibble emergent tree shoots, creating lovely sweeps of grassland, called lawns originally, with a D, but the origin of our garden lawn, lovely grassy sweeps, but certain selected oaks were protected from the deer and allowed to grow to this incredible majesty and old age. An oak of that antiquity is actually a universe in itself because of the number of species it can support. More than 2,000 species of fauna and flora. And humans did that. Is it not actually sometimes wonderfully reassuring to know that humans can do good things for nature? Anyway, put together here, 12 landscapes described. I think you'd have a reasonable word pictogram of our beloved countryside, but possibly more to the point. It is an unashamed exaltation, celebration of those landscapes, because if we don't celebrate them, people won't know them, and people won't value them, because they don't know them. And in the end, people only fight for what they value. So I'm now going to check in my privilege, because that's kind of obligatory these days. I admit to easy appreciation and natural sympathy for these landscapes, a born advantage. I farmed for 3 decades, and my family have farmed for 800 years. If you don't know my previous books, I farm for nature as well as for food. I want to bring the hares back, the arable field, the arable flowers we have so much lost, like corncockle. I want to bring those back. In the end, really, I just want the bees, the butterflies, and the flowers and the birds back. But I think because of my background, I had a privileged understanding of the landscapes in this book, because, as I said, they are mostly farmland. Even those wild bits, yeah? North Yorkshire moors, they're not wild. They're actually a type of farmland created by humans. Heathland in Dorset, it's not wild. It's created by humans. And aren't those landscapes wonderful? I mean, for me, old-style farming, working hand in hand with nature, is where it all began. And in a sense, I think that's where it all begins for England. So I'm now going to do something traditional at such events. I'm going to read an extract from my book. And you're particularly lucky, because tonight I'm going to read 2 extracts. This is the first one. I say I spent 5 years writing this book. The actual truth is, it draws on the entire experience of my life. And I was born just after the Reformation of the monasteries. So it does draw on quite, it seems like centuries, and it does seem like centuries of experience. But in what seems to be a kind of very, very long life, this is my actual very first memory. Is it the salt, the reason that seaside memories are so perfectly kept? My very first memory is absolutely brine preserved. I was a toddler, sent to stay with my great Uncle Willie and great Aunt Kath, who were sheep farmers on the Gower, Wales, their lands sloping down to the sea. Well, I realised that the incident had become recall polished in the way that broken green glass is smoothed by sea tides on the shore. The gritty substance of it remains true. I was sitting in a pushchair on the stone terrace to the front of the low snow-painted farmhouse. The sea below and shadow, Willie's collie dog bit me on the face. I have, in this moment of writing, checked in the mirror. On my forehead, still discernible, a scar, puncture wound from a canine tooth. I was bitten by more than the dog that afternoon. I was bitten by love. I have loved dogs and farming ever since. I'll explain. It was, of course, my fault that Shadow bit me. I had provoked him by waving an ice cream with a 99 chocolate flake in his face. I would have bitten me too. Shadow was my brother. I did not have a human one, nor a sister. And on that summer afternoon in the 60s, I learned to treat him like an older brother, with awe. Modern biologists reveal almost monthly that the species barrier between animals and humans is thin. I learned that in my pushchair. And if you want the truth of salt rubbed into the wound of human pretension, I have a sneaking sympathy for the science that suggests that dogs domesticated us rather than us domesticating dogs. I think it was on the same afternoon that I watched Shadow flush out sheep from the hazy ruins of the castle on a single word of command from Willie. I held Willie's leathery, wind-beaten hand. Transmitted through it was the zen contentment of a man in harmony with his dog, his stock, his land. I wanted the same. I have only ever wanted the same. The sheep grazed down to the shore, where the waves were fleecy, like sheep. We also took the massive 35 tractor and its wood-sided trailer down to the beach to gather seaweed to be used as fertilizer on the land. On other occasions, I remember taking seaweed home to give to my grandmother, great-aunt Kath's sister, and a farmer's wife herself, so she could use it to divine the weather. Seaweed hung outside the back door, swelled when rain was due, dried out to signal a more clement meteorology. My grandparents also had a morning religious ritual, tapping the barometer in the hall and then checking the pine cones on the windowsill of the small sitting room. Sometimes they fell into outright superstition and consulted the Met Office forecast. The weather is a big thing in farming. You can see where this is going. I do like to be beside the seaside, beside the sea, but the coast for me is never just a holiday resort or a bathe in marine nature. I always have one eye on the seashore's utilitarian utilization on what can be scavenged like a seagull. I will return to that scavenging. What I've sought to do in this book is what I've sought to do in my previous nature books, which is give a view of nature from within. I think my shtick is this. It's to be someone inside looking out, not a passive observer, but a committed participant. In the end, of these 12 landscapes, none of them in the end do I ever feel myself a visitor, because after my centuries of existence, as it seems, I knew them. I felt I knew them, and I was never a visitor. How do you... There's actually a simple test for knowing whether you know a place, and it is this. Can you distinguish within the species there individuals? Can you distinguish one bird from another bird? When I was at Portreath in Cornwall, and I could see and know the particularly cheery rock pipit from its fellows, yes, then I knew that place. And I could always recognise a particular deer in Richmond Deer Park because the particularly lovely snowburst markings on its flank, yes, then I knew that place. I didn't just want to do the sight of these habitats. I wanted to do, as humans we have a bit of a problem, which is our constant privileging of sight, and we really never quite use our other senses sufficiently. So yes, I did want to portray what these places look like to our eyes, but also to our ears. I wanted to capture the sound of the walk-by to cricket on the South Downs. The walk-by to cricket makes a noise which is just like something stuck in the revolving wheels of a bicycle. And then, the sound of deers, that bone-on-bone sound of deers locking antlers. And then the spring symphony of waders descending on the North Yorkshire moor when they come back to nest. Because shouldn't every landscape also be a soundscape? And if we privilege sight and hearing, do we not sometimes forget how important it is just to sniff and to smell? So yes, I tried to do in this book to convey a kind of sense of England as well as a sense of England, what England actually smells like. The vanilla notes of squincy wort on the South Downs, or, for instance, also the marvellous gunpowder incense of leaves rotting in a home county's beechwood. By the way, if you think about it, the only dying thing that ever smells good is leaf litter. I like to collect curious bits of knowledge about our nature and its human employments. The walk-by to cricket is called the walk-by to cricket because in days gone by, if you had a wart, you held the cricket to the wart until it was eaten away. You might think, that's a bit silly. I talked about this book 3 days ago in Bridport Someone came up to me and actually said, we grew up in the Philippines where we regularly put crickets to our face if we have a wart. So it's not just actual superstition. Squincy wort, isn't that a beautiful name for a plant, by the way? Squincy wort, it's fantastic. Squincy wort is called squincy wort because squincy is tonsillitis and the wort is a healing herb. A medieval form of contraception was to pop a frog from the farm pond or the village pond into the mouth of the person you were about to embrace. Now, see, if you ask me, that is a 100% effective form of contraception. But ponds, farm ponds, village ponds. 80% of the ponds in the English countryside aren't natural. They were dug by us, humans, villagers, farmers. They were dug by us. We gave the dragonfly its kill zone, the moorhen its home. If you wanted to actually say, a square metre, how much biodiversity can you actually get into a square metre? A pond is a pretty good place to actually start for maximum kind of biodiversity, and we did that. We have to remember, it is wonderfully reassuring what humans can do. All the good things we have in our landscape are, of course, under threat. You know the threats. It's a bit like, you have to be a certain age or be a cinephile to get this one, but there's a film called On the Waterfront where Marlon Brando is asked, what are you rebelling against? What are you rebelling against? He says, what have you got? In that kind of similar sense, there are so many problems faced with our landscape. What have you got? You've got the roads, you've got the building, you've got industrialized agriculture with its pesticides, its fungicides, its herbicides, all of them, in fact, a kind of suicide. You can get a sense of what's happening to the English countryside in bare numbers. I will go through it with you in bare numbers. Hay meadow is down by 95% in a century. Traditional South Downs chalkland down by similar figures since the 1950s. Salt marsh, 85% lost since 1800. The list of arable flowers actually become extinct only begins with thorax and amsuckery. Insects. If you're a certain age, do you remember driving around like 20, 30 years ago on a summer's evening and your windscreen was frankly being plastered with insects? It doesn't really happen anymore, and it's not just the changing shape of the windscreens on cars. It's because we lost so many insects. Purpley heathery heathland, which used to cover so much of lowland England, well, that's had a remarkable battering, hasn't it, really? It used to cover England from, basically Dorset to the Brecon. 200 years ago, we call Surrey today, don't we? Leafy Surrey. Okay. Well, 200 years ago, you'd have been better saying heathy Surrey, because something like 20% of Surrey was actually heathland. And only 3% of Surrey is now heathland. And also, when we're talking about the threats to our landscape and our native fauna and flora, let's not forget the invasive species. You've got parakeets, haven't you? Yeah, I know, because I've gone past you and seen them flying in those acidly kind of squadrons. Does it matter that we have so many parakeets, national flock being something like 75,000 parakeets? It probably does if you're a native bat. Because what parakeets actually do is actually they evict native bats from their roosting places, turf them out, and take them over. And I think that's a problem. If England is fortunate in its signature landscapes that are wonderful variety, that actually imposes on us a special duty. I mentioned heathland more than once for a special reason, because within England's borders lies proportionately more heathland than anywhere else in the world. We have 20% of the world's heathland. If you start totting up more land, the UK as a whole has something like 20%, internationally significant amount. And of course, with these iconic signature habitats come their dependent fauna and flora. In England, we have a quarter of the world's bluebells. We have perhaps a quarter of the population, the entire population of the Eurasian curlew. So we have responsibilities because of our wonderful landscapes. I mean, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? This book is a walk with ghosts. It's a walk with ghosts because it's explicitly informed by the nature writers of the past, Edward Thomas, B.B., Richard Jefferies. I read them obsessively because of this. See, what's happened is generations have got used to nature on the ration. Each generation gets used to less and less nature around it. If you go back, which is what I do, to the writers like, B.B., Edward Thomas, further still, what you actually get in their books is the sense and the picture and the sound of what England was like when it was bright with birdsong and loud with the colour of wildflowers. And really, in a sense, to go forward to the future, I think we need to have that in our head, how bountifully rich our countryside could be. The real inspiration for this book was the Reverend Gilbert White, he of the 18th century book, The Natural History of Selborne, which is actually the foundation text of English nature writing. Nature writing, by the way, is a curiously thin thing abroad. Reverend Gilbert White, the founder of English nature writing for many reasons, but particularly this. He did something he called watching narrowly. Yes, close-eyed observation, obviously, but it had many more senses than that. There's a sense of giving every creature its due. Yes, in this book, I wanted to account for our iconic animals, like the deer, the hare, also our flora, our trees, such as the oak. It is a sort of state of nature survey. But what I really wanted to do, I think, is to remember the small things, the small creatures, the common creatures, which is what Reverend Gilbert White did, which is why are we so obsessed with big, charismatic animals? Going on safari to see elephants, reintroducing wolves, when there are real wonders under our noses right here, right now. I mean, really, the wood pigeon. It's as common a bird as you're going to find, but it does something absolutely remarkable when it's feeding its young. What it does is produce something like mammalian milk, but it's a bird. Swim with dolphins in the Bahamas. I've stuck my head into a Herefordshire stream and watched a stickleback, a tiny little fish like this, actually build a home, a structure, proper structure on the bed of the stream. A proper structure with a door and an exit, which is a really remarkable thing. A fish actually builds a structure underwater. English nature is full of wonders under our noses. Meadow ants. Go to some rough grassland around here. You'll probably find what we in Herefordshire would call a tump, but probably thinking of a mound or a hill, the meadow ant's nest. If you delve down to the bottom of that nest, actually underground, what you would find is this. What meadow ants do is in a cellar underground, they keep a herd of aphids. And in this cellar, meadow ants milk the aphids in the way that dairy farmers milk cows. What the ants are actually doing is milking the aphids of their sap, which is in itself quite interesting. But here is the really weird and wonderful thing. Those aphids kept in the cellar by the meadow ants are probably clones of a particularly productive aphid of some eons ago. Therefore, we thought cloning Dolly was clever, but it turns out that insects have actually managed to do cloning already. Go to the garden centre, buy a bonsai tree. Tell you what, go up to the Lake District, you will find a tree, a proper tree that is 1 inch tall. It's called the least willow. It's a proper tree, and it's 1 inch tall. If we ever get out into deep space with Elon Musk rockets, tell you what, nothing we're going to find in deep space is going to be half as interesting as anything you are going to find in an English coastal rock pool. Let's take the starfish. I mean, I always love it. You know. When one goes to the coast, you know, there's always the beach shack, isn't there, on the coast? And, you know, you buy your shrimp nets and whatever, and you know, buckets for the kids. And they're always starfishy things, you know, like there's a sort of fluffy coloured starfish for the kids to kind of almost cuddle. And then there's the ornamental porcelain starfish for people to hold, to put up on the wall as a kind of ornament. Do people not know what the starfish's gruesome habits are? Because this is what starfish do. They look lovely, but oh my goodness, their habits. So what they actually do is, their favourite food is shellfish, which they pursue by scent. When the starfish has captured its favourite food, which is the mussel, with its tentacles, it pulls the mussel apart. By the way, if you ever tried pulling a mussel apart yourself, it's actually really rather difficult. Those of you like, you know, your move and your fruits, try putting it, it's difficult. Anyway, the starfish pulls the mule apart, at which point the starfish extrudes its own stomach through its mouth into the mussel, injects digestive enzymes which reduce the mussel to a kind of suctionable soup, which it then slurps up. Oh my goodness. Then we have the crab hacker barnacle. The crab hacker barnacle. Oh my goodness. If anything ever did what it says on the label, it's the crab hacker barnacle. So what the barnacle does is hack into the bodies, invade the bodies, of crabs. In England, the shore crab being a favourite. If the barnacle invades the body of a male shore crab, what the barnacle does is chemically castrate the shore crab. It chemically castrates it. It changes its entire system into making it an incredibly broody, maternal crab that looks after the parasites in its own body. Welcome to the English Rocky Pool Horror Show. We haven't even got to the cuttlefish. Ah, the cuttlefish. You know the cuttlefish, don't you? You know, from when you walk on the beach and you find its kind of white, what's called the cuttlefish bone, used to be fed to, you know, parrots and things, which is the cuttlefish's actual flotation aid. The cuttlefish is closely related to slugs and snails. It's a kind of squiddy thing, essentially. It's quite a remarkable creature. It's got 3 hearts. It can change colour in many and extraordinary ways, which is why it is known as the chameleon of the sea. I mean, it can do such, camouflaging as changing its, its underneath can be different to its top. It can do sort of, sideways. So some of it is one shade and some of it is another shade. It's remarkable. It is truly the chameleon of the sea. But then this squiddy thing has an episodic memory that does not diminish over time. Yours does. Yours does. Yours does. So actually, this sluggy thing in the sea, in some senses, has a better memory than we do. Is that not just a little bit kind of humbling to know that a creature like that, in some ways, is more empowered than we are? Do you not think? You see, what we do is we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, doubly wise humans. I mean, is that really wise to call ourselves doubly wise humans? Because if we were wise, we would not injure nature, because self-preservation alone will tell us not to injure nature. I spent 5 to 6 years writing this book, a lifetime, a very long lifetime, researching it, being inside its 12 habitats. So like Gilbert White, I think I've learned my place, the wonder of nature, and in some ways our own insignificance, and perhaps a little on how to repair our relationship with nature. I think one of the first things in this book is an epigram which says, "Only connect." How do you connect with nature in this modern age? Well, I think this. I think you are never closer to nature than when you are growing it, farming, which of course is also gardening, even it's watering a pot plant in the office, or picking it, foraging, which of course is scavenging, and even killing it. See, all my books have recipes using wild things. It's not an affectation, it's because it's about engagement. I want people to understand about being dependent on nature, because if you do those things, you enter the food chain and you become aware, at least, of your dependency on nature, and perhaps learn a little humility. And yes, I did say killing. I don't propose any easy solutions to restoring England's nature. And here's a concrete example. The most biodiverse moor I have ever encountered is Staunton Moor in North Yorkshire, which is a grouse moor where grouse are driven towards guns to be shot. Driven grouse shooting is really not my bag, but I do have to recognise that the system of gamekeeping there, which is sympathetic to its environment, produces such flourishes of bird life that even the British Trust for Ornithology has to acknowledge how many different species of waders, how the prolificity of waders that are nesting there, and indeed even the number of raptors that exist there, because what those gamekeepers do is control certain predators, control, not exterminate, certain predators, so there can be a flourishing of wildlife. So, maybe we should not be dogmatic, dog-whistly, when it comes to how we save our countryside, maybe it's not just sometimes about our human political preferences, but about nature's need. It's easy to be gloomy. And doom, by the way, is always the easiest prophecy, isn't it? But I can tell you, in the years spent in the habitats of this book, you can still find wonderful things. One of the things I wanted to do was, what I actually wanted to do was find out, really, in our, crowded England, with its cars and its building and its people, I wanted to find out whether there are still places you can go, really, to be alone with nature, to have that kind of, communion with nature, to find those wild kind of spaces, temples, churches, whatever. I mean, just that thing, that kind of getting away and being at one with nature, away from the crowds. And you can. And sometimes you can find those kind of spaces in unusual and remarkable and unsuspected places. I've had a very late age love affair, and I have told my wife. I have a love affair with a particular section of the Thames estuary from East Tilbury to Leigh-on-Sea, which is, on the surface of things, one of the ugliest places you could possibly imagine. But this. This is from the Thames estuary. Lines of geometry and solitude. The black line of salt marsh meeting the water, then the grey band of the estuary, the horizontal far shore of Kent under the arc of the winter's sky, and the D-curved beak of the Curlew crying its own name into the silence. Downstream, on the vanishing plain of bleak water, the giant cranes of DP World London Gateway, metal praying mantis, looking along the spray can graffiti-strewn seawall concrete, towering 2 yards high in each direction as far as the human eye can see. No one, not one soul. Flat water, flat land. The estuary foreshore, the lowest point of the land mass, a low point, a wasteland of salt marsh. The coarse grass prostrate before the wind, and down in the dark, twisted creeks, an anxiousness of gathering mist, no colour, no warmth, a vast arm-flung panorama in monochrome. The Thames estuary in November, a confirmation of desolation. You will never be so alone as walking its edge in winter. The tide's departed fecal sludge, riven by rivulets, unstudied by detritus. A bent bike dead on its side, discarded shoes, washed up bottles devoid of messages. Along the estuary of the Thames, where the primness of the environment is intensified by the impersonality of industry, the petrochemical works, the gravel pits. The estuary of the Thames, where the wildness of nature is intensified by the proximity of a populous capital city, London, a mere 10 miles, as the gull flies. Jesus wept. The Thames estuary on the dull November afternoon. But it has its sudden beauties, the play of light on gliding tidal water, those abstract geometries of the landscape, the soul fulfilling aloneness, and the way that, if you swivel your head just so, the waders and the wildfowl descending on the mudflats in evening perform a ballet against the setting sun, a box seat at Goose Estuary as opposed to Swan Lake. You see, the thing about that extract is this. In this book, I wanted to be a traveller in small things, to notice the small things in our landscape, such as those meadow ants. But the small things are also about moments. What's about moments? It's about wanting to draw people's eyes to such things as the beauty of light on sliding tidal water. The way that if you look at a pond when it's raining, all the raindrops form perfect spirograph circles. These things are beautiful and they're worth knowing. After that moment in the book, I looked out onto the Thames estuary, and there was a phenomenon I didn't even know existed. I looked out, and there were 10 avocet, the wader, floating on the water. Now, in avocet, normally you see them with their long, ridiculously spindly legs, doing that. And I didn't even know they could float, let alone there'd be a raft of them out there. Anyway, there were 10 avocet out there on the water. I didn't even know they could actually float. But, first of all, wonderful thing, 10 avocet gave me the first opportunity in my life to use the collective noun for avocet, which is orchestra. I mean, isn't that a lovely name? Lovely name, collective noun. Anyway, the 10 avocet are out there. But, of course, apart from the beauty of that moment, the avocet, 50, 60 years ago, was barely existent in England. Which is why it became the kind of totem and the emblem of the RSPB. But, you see, the avocet's numbers have recovered. See, in this book, I have found there are literally grounds, and sometimes slightly soggy grounds, like the Thames estuary, for hope. For hope. Because, well, let's take this. When I was a child, in the 1970s, I would pester my father when we were driving down from Herefordshire to see the aunts in Weymouth. I'd make him go to the Isle of Purbeck so I could see a Dartford warbler in the 1970s. A Dartford warbler can be sometimes quite a difficult bird to observe because it's so ridiculously small, inconveniently small, to be honest, for those with the fading eyesight, inconveniently small. But the reason I really couldn't see a Dartford warbler is because there are probably only about 12 of them. There are now 3,000. Otters, not so long ago, 20 years ago, were almost entirely restricted to the west and north of England, but now I think exist in every English county. Bitterns are back on the Broads. Great cranes back on the Broads. See, there are good people doing good things, such as the wildlife trusts. Like all great battles, the battle for England's nature is not over until it's won. If it's not won, it's not over. Thank you.
John is happy to take some questions if any of you have ones,
No,
please.
John is happy to take the easy questions.
Do get your hands up now, and that accounts for the virtual crowd as well, if you'd like to submit a question.
Do you say virtual crowd?
There's a crowd watching online as well, so lovely.
How do we know about the cuttlefish's memory?
Yes, I know, it's funny, I get this asked quite often. There are obscure scientists doing the most obscure research, is the truth of it. And apparently, it's all to do with the mass of the brain and impulses sent to it and recorded over time, and comparing cuttlefish to humans and how they respond to particular events. So it's a kind of over time thing, and whether your memory mass and your capability diminishes over time because electrodes stuck into, effectively, brains of cuttlefish and humans. Believe me, there are university departments out there doing the most remarkable research.
Yeah, I'm interested in your process of writing. You read out a beautiful extract from your book about the Thames estuary, where you have wonderful prose. And when you write, do you go out to the Thames estuary and make notes, a bit like an artist taking sketches and notes and then bring them back to write about them? What's your process of writing and capturing the essence of the environment?
Can you just say that again? Wonderful prose. Oh, that's it. Job done. I do all my writing in exactly the same way, okay? Which is, because I'm a farmer, if you want to be a nature writer, I have to confess at this point that being a very traditional farmer is actually quite an advantage, because basically I'm outdoors all the time. Yeah, I mean, my tractors don't even have proper windscreens or glass around them, so I am in the environment. And if you're out there long enough, things just happen. People say to me, "How could you possibly see that?" Well, the thing is, if you're outside 16 hours a day, these things just kind of happen. So what I do, I have I have little notebooks, and I write them down. I write the things down as soon as they happen. Great advantage of farming for a nature writer is this: there's an awful lot of blank time in farming. Like, you're shoveling shit, you're going up and down in the tractor. So when you've written your notes, you can actually start, working on your written notes as you would indeed start working on the field. They're remarkably similar enterprises. They don't seem similar, farming and writing, but they're all about kind of cultivation and just working and putting in the effort. So it's all about writing down little bits of notes, working on them, and what happens is, when you've written enough little bits of paper, you can stick them together, and you've got a book. That's not entirely true. That's 70-80% true, because there's this terrible, crucial thing at the end. You've got your notes all stuck together, but then it never quite sits properly. So then you have to spend like hours, in the middle of the night trying to get it all. I have a technique for writing books, and this is going to be. I have two confessions about writing. The first thing is, they're both embarrassing, and you're not to tell anyone. Okay, it's just between us. Okay. Before I sort of love doing these things, yeah, because I spend quite a lot of my time looking at the back end of animals. And it's quite nice to talk to people. But I find it quite a difficult thing to do. So I have two things to do before I can come and talk to you. One is I have to have a very large glass of white wine. And the other thing is I have to listen to Robbie Williams on headphones, letting me entertain you. Okay? No, really. I cannot go up on stage without listening to Robbie Williams letting me entertain you. The other thing is, in writing a book, and I thought this was just me, but it's not just me, it's very difficult to maintain a kind of voice from the first page to the last page, particularly if it's not your main job. For me, because farming is my main job. So how do you kind of maintain a voice throughout things? So what I do is I attach my writing to a particular song. Okay. For this book, I listen to the verb history. Does anyone know the verb? Right, okay. I listen to the verb history on Spotify, but something like 5,000 times on a loop. Because if you only have a certain amount of hours to do something, it's quite difficult, So if I wake up and at 7 o'clock in the morning thinking, I've got to do an hour's writing, and I've just got this book to write, I can't do it. But if I wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm thinking, okay, it's an hour in the winter before I can actually start doing my farm jobs, I've got to do an hour of writing. If I put on headphones, and if I attached the book to the verb, history, I plug it in and I can start writing. I thought I was the only person who did that, but I was at a literary festival once, and there's an extremely brilliant English nature called Rob Cowan, whose Common Ground I would recommend to you. So we were talking about things, and I said, I've got this terrible habit, that I just listen to one song. I once listened to one song 9,000 times, by the way, on a loop. And he said, yes, I do it. And then someone else, Adele, who was also there as well, said she did it. And then it's like a chain reaction, like, 101 Dalmatians, where all the dogs say the same thing. It was, every writer actually said there's, the song they kind of attach their writing to. And if they play this song, they can start the writing. So anyway, so yes, that's my embarrassing secrets, right? Hi. God. I didn't mean to do that, actually.
Could I ask how Plum's truffle training is coming along?
Oh, God. If only the training was going. Right, so I now farm in France, and I have planted a small truffier, which is a very grand name for 8 truffle trees. See, truffles, everyone thinks they just sprout under the ground. What you actually do is you go onto the internet, you go to a particular, effectively garden centre, nursery, and say, can I buy some truffle trees, i.e. trees whose roots are impregnated with truffles? That's the secret of it, you see. Well, actually, it's not a great secret, really, is it? It's not, is it? It's like some sort of mystery thing. Truffles, no. You just go on the internet, you buy a particular type of tree, and its roots are impregnated with truffles. So we have 8 truffle trees at the moment, oaks and hazel. But, you see, then the truffles grow underground, and then you have to find a way of scenting out the truffles when they've grown. I am having a problem. Thank you for drawing everyone's attention to this. Thing is, when my wife and I went to France about 7 years ago, I went to France on a sabbatical. What I poshly call my sabbatical. I was given a small grant to study organic lavender and wine production with the idea of bringing lessons learned back to England. My wife and I never quite properly left, and we became involved in a village in France, which has quite a lot of truffle production, and we were once taken home by our lovely neighbours, Jean and Violette, who are truffle farmers. 11 o'clock at night, and we're sitting there under a single lamp, oilskin on the table, and we're talking about truffles. So I said to Violette, so what's best for sniffing out the truffles? Is it a dog or is it a pig? And she said, John, have you tried getting a pig into the back of a car? So I didn't go for the pig at this point. I decided to go for the dog. However, I have a black Labrador called Plum, who I'm trying to train for truffles. It's really expensive because what you have to do to train a dog to get the truffles is you have to buy a truffle, bury it underground. And truffles, you can get a truffle for one truffle's like 30 quid. Chop it up a bit, you bury it underground, hope the dog will find it. If the dog finds it, give it a square of cheese. At the moment, I've lost so much money on trying to train my Labrador to find truffles. So the answer is no, it's not going well.
We'll take one more question.
I wasn't going to ask a question, so perhaps you just bear with me. I haven't probably thought this through. The inheritance tax rules for small farms in England just changed in the last budget.
God.
Sorry, I made it political.
What happened was I thought, Can I get out of here without me tearing my remaining hair out?
My question really is, I can see that loads of small family farms are going to have to be sold off in the coming years to pay the inheritance tax. And I just wondered, do you think that's going to change the landscape for the better or the worse?
Okay, so I said easy questions, and thank you, that's the most difficult question going. I don't even know where to begin with it because it is so tangled and difficult. Okay. What this actually boils down to in the end is, what sort of countryside do you want? What sort of countryside do you want? Do you want a countryside with small and traditional working farms or not? That's what it boils down to. Okay? There are many threats to small and traditional farms. Inheritance tax is actually one of them. Even if you're a clever economist in this audience or tax advisor and can say that the 1 million threshold is actually not true, it's 1.5 or 2 million, but the truth is, it is actually a threat to small traditional farming. There are many threats to small traditional farming, family farms. So it is really all about what sort of countryside we want. How much time have I got? 2 minutes. I'll be brief. Okay, there are many threats. Okay, I would say rewilding, for instance, is also a threat to small traditional family farms because of this. Okay, if you abstract 100 acres currently given over to food, given over to rewilding, where does your food come from? Okay, well, your food can only come from what? The choices aren't great. The choices are this. You offshore the problem, you buy in your food. You intensify agriculture on the remaining farmland, or you go for the eco-tech solution, which is a real threat to small farms, and it's being developed in Food Valley in the Netherlands now. Go out from here tonight, Google Food Valley in the Netherlands, and there you will see what future is being proposed for you. And this is not a conspiracy. Go and look at it. And all the major food multinationals are putting their money into what is essentially growing your future food in vats. You don't believe me? Go and look at it. At the moment, there are $20 billion invested alone in the production of artificial meat. You can see why it's advantageous for multinationals if you just grow in vats without humans and without those obstreperous farmers. There are many threats to farming. Inheritance tax is one. The proposed future for agriculture by the multinationals who control so much of food production is just another. I, at least, really believe that the only possible future for us is traditional farming. And I'll tell you another reason why. We are worried about climate change, yeah? Well, there's so many threats to us, aren't there? Where have the insects gone? We have no insects. But this, I don't want to be a nerd about turd. But if you look at what comes out of the back end of an organic cow, its poo, okay, supports 2 million insects per annum. One organic cow supports 2 million insects per annum. The future, if you want the future I think we all want, is actually organic farming. And I've survived. Right.
John Lewis-Stempel, everyone. So I do apologise. We've run 10 minutes over, but I'm sure none of you will be complaining.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
So John will now be signing books. Many of you took the book and ticket option. So in the foyer on the right-hand side, we have a table. The shop is very full, very stocked of his entire back catalogue. So I would urge you to take this opportunity to get a signed John Lewis-Stempel book, notwithstanding, obviously, England as well. So just take an opportunity now, get a book, get a signed book, and thank you once more to John Lewis-Stempel.